Sutra. An unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect Dharma is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million kalpas. Having it to see and listen to, remember and accept, I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's teachings. In Buddhism, when Zen practitioners share their understandings of the teachings and practice, it's offered on the base of dana paramita. Dana is a Pali word that means generosity or to give freely, and this is done without the expectation of anything in return. And those who share the teachings at Great Tree do so on a dana basis, so please support their practice by giving what you can. Genryu has very generously offered her dana back to Great Tree, so you can go to the Great Tree website and hit the support button in the upper right. Our speaker today is Genryu Brook Reynolds, who has been a Sangha member for a long time. She has been practicing at Great Tree for many years. In addition to her study and practice of Zen Buddhism, being in nature has been an integral part of her personal growth and healing. During the pandemic, she completed her certification as a nature and forest therapy guide with the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy. The title of her talk is Forest Bathing, or Shinrin-yoku. And this talk will describe the history, practice, and benefits of Shinrin-yoku, which has its origins in Japan. And then later in April, I think April 19th, there will be an opportunity for some remote nature connection through Great Tree that Brooke will lead and sharing of that personal experience. All right, Brooke, take it away.
All right, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I have a PowerPoint presentation that I would like to use for this talk. Full disclosure, I did this presentation a few years ago for the North Carolina Arboretum, but I adapted it slightly for this talk to incorporate some Buddhist elements near the end. So I'm going to share my screen, and I hope this works. I'm not very good at Zoom. Um, let's see. Advanced sharing options. It's not letting me share my screen.
So I think if you hit the share button,
Oh,
oops.
okay. There we go.
Sorry, that was my screen, but
Oh,
that share button with the arrow at the top, if you just choose whichever window you want to share, which is like the
yeah.
PowerPoint window,
Okay.
great, we can see it.
Great. I'm going to go to full screen just to get rid of the extra. Okay, so forest bathing and nature therapy. Shinrin-yoku is literally translated as forest bathing. And I've got some slides here with some photographs of things in nature, and all the photographs are mine except for when noted. There's some quotes on the slides also. I'll read some of them, and some of them I'll just let you read if you want to, but I love this one. Those who contemplate the beauty of the earth find reserves of strength that will endure as long as life lasts. Rachel Carson, The Sense of Wonder. Oops. Um, so I want to share a little bit about my journey to becoming a guide. Um, in 2004, I started practicing at Great Tree to learn how to meditate. And in 2015, I started taking some naturalist classes at the Arboretum to learn how to identify flora and fauna, especially flowers. I really love wildflowers. In 2016, I did a naturalist walk in Georgia with a friend, and it included forest bathing, which I had never heard of before, and which was very different from focusing on identifying plants. It was just more about being in nature. In 2018, I went on another naturalist walk in North Carolina where the guide asked us to actually go meditate for a while in nature. And it was a cloudy, rainy day. And I remember sitting on this rock. It had been cloudy all morning. And all of a sudden, and I had my eyes closed, all of a sudden, the sun came out and everything just got brighter and warmer. And I felt my whole body just go, ah. And then I also kind of almost at the same time wondered if the rest of the, creatures in the forest felt the same way. And immediately I was like, of course they do. So it was this just kind of wonderful feeling of connection with everything in the forest. And that stayed with me. That experience really stayed with me. So in 2019, I registered to be a guide, um, registered for the training to be a guide with the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy. And the training was supposed to be in person in Tennessee in the fall of 2020. Early in 2020, I went to Peru for a week, fell and broke my ankle, and then we had the COVID shutdown in March, and I didn't know if we would actually have the training in October because nobody was doing anything in person, but they were able to adapt it so that we could do it on Zoom. And, now I'm giving this talk on Zoom. So Zoom has opened up a lot of things um, for people when things were really shut down during the pandemic. So here's a little bit about my trip to Peru. I was going there to see some sacred mountains. I love nature. I was hiking around the Monkey Temple, which is part of the Sacsayhuaman in Cuzco. And I fell and it was a really bad fall. I broke my ankle. I broke my left ankle. I sprained my right ankle and I had to literally be carried out of the ruins on a stretcher. And it was the second day of the trip. So needless to say, the trip was ruined. And I spent the rest of the time in the hotel room. But thankfully, this was the view out my window. A beautiful, beautiful view. And I was able to actually make it to one of the mountains, Tucson, and there I am with my crutches, with my victory stance of actually getting to see one sacred mountain in Peru. And then I came home. It was about March 1st, and not long after that, everything was shut down. But before it was shut down, I managed to drive up to the parkway and get some nature in. Then the parkway was shut down. And then I was going to the local park, Ledges Park, to be by the river. And that's someone that I saw meditating by the river one time I was there. But then they shut down the local parks too. So I was just pretty much confined to what I could access from my house. And so there's a spot that I would go sit at on my back deck. So, the pandemic made a lot of people really appreciate how nature and how important nature was. And I just, have a couple of questions, just to, you don't have to answer, but just, answer them to yourselves. So, how many of you would say you love nature? Um, how much time do you spend in nature? And how does being in nature affect your health? Now, I'm guessing almost everyone said they love nature. It's pretty common, and the term biophilia is a term that relates to loving nature. Literally, bio life, philia love. It was coined by Eric Fromm, a psychologist in the 60s, and then it was popularized by E.O. Wilson in his book Biophilia, where he sort of started the field of sociobiology. It's really defined as the innate and instinctive affinity humans have for other living organisms and nature. It represents the emotional connection and the sense of well-being derived from being in nature. And, it was theorized that because we evolved in nature and in wild settings and relied on on the environment for our survival, that there's an instinctive drive to connect with nature that bonds us to each other and other species. All creatures have this connection with nature, but it seems that people have kind of lost it, uh, especially in the modern age. So the modern problem, and there's like a term for it that's not, an official diagnosis, is nature deficit disorder. And there was a book called Last Child in the Woods, which talked about this and talked about how it was affecting children in particular. I remember being a kid and playing a lot outside, but I have friends who have kids who can't get their children away from their screens now to do anything outside. So, there's scientific evidence that this nature deficit disorder is contributing to other issues such as obesity and illness, and it also weakens ecological literacy and our interest in stewardship of the natural world. These concepts of nature deficit disorder have broadened to include adults and communities. Um, so there's a modern problem, but the ancient solution, which people have been doing, since the beginning of human evolution, is connecting with nature. And there's a book called The Nature Fix, by Florence Williams. And Florence Williams also was trained to be a guide with the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy. And she came to the Arboretum and did a talk a couple of years ago and guided some walks. And I went on a walk with her, and that was really cool. But she presents a lot of scientific research that provides evidence for the benefits of nature on health and wellness. I mean, people kind of intuitively know that they feel better, but for some reason, like, to convince people that might not be as likely to spend time in nature, there needs to be some evidence of that. Um, E.O. Wilson, who I mentioned earlier, loved her book and said it was a beautifully written, thoroughly enjoyable exposition of a major principle of human life, now supported by evidence in biology, psychology, and medicine. There's a great YouTube interview with her called Getting a Nature Fix. The link's at the bottom. And I just like how she, even the title, The Nature Fix, like it's something, it's an easy fix for a lot of problems. It's so simple, but some people have just forgotten about it. So there is now a lot of evidence-based research for the benefits of nature. There's physiological, psychological, ecological benefits. Studies have shown that it does lower your cortisol levels. They can measure that. It lowers your blood pressure and your heart rate. It can improve your attention and mood. It can improve your immune system. Um, there are pro-social and pro-environmental effects, meaning people are nicer to each other and the planet. There have also been studies on what's being referred to as nearby nature, such as parks and schools, and the difference in accessibility and equity for parks and schools. You don't have to go to the wilderness to get the benefits of nature. You could go for a walk in your neighborhood or at a local park. Studies have also shown that images and sounds of nature help, like art in a hospital room or architecture that mimics nature, but real nature is better. People have experiences of wonder and awe in nature, and that can stimulate creativity and boost joy. And then there's the spiritual connection to a higher power, experiencing the more than human world, something bigger than yourself out in nature. So there's all this evidence to support that being in nature is good for you. Here's some of my personal research. This is the my self-directed experiential education. I still couldn't walk very well this summer after I broke my ankle, so I took up kayaking. And here is me kind of zenning out in my kayak at Watauga Lake. So, like I said there before, there have been a lot of studies. There was an article called Nurtured by Nature in the American Psychological Association. Um, it sort of repeats some of the things I said before, but it says green spaces and blue spaces, aquatic environments are also beneficial. Um, More remote and biodiverse spaces, such as the wilderness, may be particularly helpful, but it's not necessary. Parks and just even, a tree in your backyard, spending time with a tree in your backyard can have positive outcomes. So, forest bathing, um, there were a couple of books there have been a lot of books that were written, but two written at the same time. One by Amos Clifford, who was the founder of the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy, where I did my training, was published in 2018, and also a famous early book on forest bathing was uh, published by the chairman of the Japanese Society for Forest Medicine, um, because Japan caught on to this much sooner than a lot of other people, and they actually coined the term forest bathing, Shinrin-yoku, in 1982. So, what happened in Japan was there was a technology boom in the early 80s, and which led to people spending more time in an office, bigger cities, faster paced lifestyles, and more health problems that were correlated with less time in nature. So, the practice was of getting back out in nature was first inspired by Buddhist and Shinto traditions. But later, the Japanese started doing experiments, and other countries started doing them as well, to provide evidence of the benefits of nature, which I mentioned before. One of the interesting things that they discovered was that these organic compounds emitted from trees, especially evergreen trees. They were called phytoncides, and they're basically the tree's own immune system, and it puts out this chemical in the air. Well, interestingly enough, breathing in these phytoncides benefits people as well. It activates their immune system, and they were able to measure that too. So, Japan really embraced this practice, and since 2006, they have declared 62 designated forest therapy spaces. It may be more now because that statistic I looked up in 2020. So I don't know. It may be more now. It'd be really cool if it was. So the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy was founded in 2012, and Amos Clifford had actually traveled to Japan prior to that and learned about Shinrin-yoku. He was also influenced by working as a wilderness guide and his own Zen meditation and psychotherapy and the Native American vision quest which involves someone going out into the wilderness for a few days. Um, so this organization now provides training and forest therapy guide certification, and there are trainings all over the world. Um, I wanted to do mine in Tennessee because it's closest to the, you know, environment here in North Carolina. But that didn't work out. So, some of my personal influences are my own Zen meditation practice. And I've always loved the references to nature in Buddhism, such as the mountains and the moon and dew and flowers and rivers and so forth. But I also had a background in experiential education, um, working as a trip leader at UNC Charlotte for their venture program, leading day hikes and backpacking trips. And I'd also participated on an Outward Bound in my teens and later a Knowles National Outdoor Leadership School. And the emphasis there is experiential education, learning by experience, not, being told what to do so much. So, what is a forest therapy walk? Well, I tell people that it's not hiking, it's not a naturalist trip, it's not about learning how to name things, it's not really about doing anything. It's more about just being in nature and connecting with your senses and connecting with each other. So, why do you need a guide? Um, well, some people don't really feel comfortable in nature or they don't even really know what to do. So having a guide can provide some structure and some safety, um, welcoming people, offering invitations for different ways to connect with nature, um, it's trauma informed, meaning it's, you're not forcing anyone to do anything. It's all voluntary. They don't have to participate. Um, and the guide can keep track of time for people. So you don't have to worry about what time it is. And, we all know how nice that is when you're practicing Zazen. So, um, it's really about learning to connect with yourself, the present moment, the more than human world, and sharing that experience with others. I love what Amos Clifford says about being a guide. He says, the forest is the therapist, the guide opens the doors. So, that kind of gave me a sense of relief and freedom that I'm not really responsible for healing anyone. The nature does it. I can show them some ways that might be helpful, some ways to connect, but nature is the therapist, not me. Nature is the healer. So one of the things about forest bathing is edges. We all have our edges, the edge of our safety zone. This mug, life begins at the end of your comfort zone, was a gift from Chimio, actually. And it's one of my favorite mugs. And it's very true, like that growing edge. And everybody's edges are different. Like on the left is a picture of my friend standing up on a rock, and I would not do that. I'm afraid of heights. So that I don't even know if I could do, I would be sitting. I could sit on the rock, but I don't think I could stand on that rock. And then on the right are some people at Midnight Hole actually jumping off a rock into the water. There's just no way. But I might be able to work up to that, if I sat on the rock and then I stood. I don't know, but challenging those growing edges are important and everybody's edges are different. Um, so, for some people, nature can provoke fear. They're afraid of things like poison ivy. Make an effort to point things like this out on a walk. Like, there might be some poison ivy. Let them know what some of the things that they could be afraid of are, and what not to worry about. The banana spider is big and scary, but it's harmless, and garter snakes are harmless as well. I've never seen a snake on a guided walk or a spider for that matter, but have seen some poison ivy, and there's some at Great Tree too. It might be gone now, um, since the mountain seat ceremony. Um, so it can also inspire awe. And I like this quote, we stand somewhere between the mountain and the ants. Sort of puts things in perspective. And awe doesn't have to be this like grand landscape either. It can be the bright red flower, or, you know, little drops of dew on a spider web and some grass. So, those are things you could see in your yard. You don't have to go to the Grand Canyon to experience awe. Um, and connecting with your senses. There in the beginning of each walk, there's kind of a guided meditation that sort of leads people through connecting with their senses. And, did I skip a? I think I might have. Yeah. Sorry. Um, there's a guided meditation that leads people through connecting with their senses. Um, the ones we usually think of: sight, sound, smell, taste, touch. Um, and the ones we don't usually think of, which is like the imaginal sense. We learned about that in the training, is sort of your imagination, and the heart. And that kind of reminds me of like the wisdom of the heart, like the Heart Sutra, and then also the senses that, no eyes, no ears, no nose, that we chant in the Heart Sutra as well. Um, and then connecting with each other. And so one of the prompts is after people will, like, after an offer an invitation, like, wander around and, notice what's red or something. People would, or notice color. People would come back, and the prompt would be, what are you noticing? And it's really to kind of get people to like pay attention to their surroundings and see what's there. And there's a little screech owl in this picture that I named her Screechy, and she lived in a tree around the corner from my house for, oh my gosh, like 10 years, which is a long time for an owl, unless that was one of her daughters that started living in that little nook herself. And I would look forward to seeing her every time, like especially in the winter, she would like to hang out in that little nook and get some sunlight. And once I noticed her, I would start looking for her, and I would look forward to seeing her in her little nook. When I would drive, I could literally just drive by and see her from my car. So, just getting joy, just that little connection with another being, it brought me a lot of joy. And on walks, you might connect with a flower or an insect or a tree, or even just the, wind. And so a question, people have, and a question I think that was maybe studied as well, is how much time do you spend in nature? And, that it could be like a dosing question, like what is the right dose of your nature medicine? And um, studies have shown, like in Finland, that 5 hours a month could prevent mild depression. But even what they call microdoses of nearby nature, just like I said earlier, walking in a park or sitting on your porch or just looking out a window can be beneficial. And in the forest bathing guided walks, they're about 2 to 3 hours, just depending on the group. And It's really cool. Prescriptions are now being offered for forest bathing. Um, I saw that NC State Student Health, like this year, is now offering prescriptions for students to spend time in nature. So, another big part of the walk is near the end of the walk, I invite people to go out and just find a spot to sit. And th that we called that in the training our sit spot. And we had to do a little sketch of a sit spot in our yard. So this was my sit spot in my yard, and I actually had several little sit spots that I would like to sit by. And I have a apacheta in my yard, which is just like a stone altar. I like to find stones in nature and bring them home and pile them up. But there's also like my porch. If it's raining, I don't want to sit out in the rain. So I have like my porch sit also. And I drew a few little critters that I would see, little bird and a little squirrel on my sits and some trees. But then I had a local sit spot at a nearby park that I would like to go to as well. The Beaver Lake Bird Sanctuary, and just sit and just be out in nature. Um, And at the end of a walk, I offer a tea. And we learned how to make teas from different plants, like pine needle tea was really common. I don't particularly like it. It's fun and interesting to know that you can make pine needle tea and it actually has a lot of vitamin C in it. And that's an easy one to gather on a walk and make for people. There's dandelion tea, blackberry leaf tea, and lots of different teas you could make from things that you find on walks. But I enjoy the Yopan tea. Um, it's actually I learned about Yopan tea on Ossabaw Island in Georgia on a trip there. Someone gathered some Yopan and he dried it out in the oven and made tea. And I had never heard of it. And um, it's a native North American plant, especially to the southeast and especially to the coast. And it's um, like the only plant in North America that has caffeine in it. South America's got yerba mate, and it was really popular with Native Americans and colonists. But um, the British people didn't want Yopan tea competing with their own tea imports, so they discouraged people from drinking it in a variety of ways. And one of the ways was by giving it a horrible Latin name called Ilex vomitoria, because stronger concentrations of the tea would make you vomit. But just, the medicine or poison is what's the difference in medicine or poison and the dosage. So the Native Americans would drink a very concentrated version of this called the black drink for ceremonies, and it was intended to be like, to make you purge. Whereas just brewing it like regular tea, it's literally like having a regular cup of tea. Tastes kind of like black tea. It's really nice. So I like to have Yopan tea at the end of my walks. And this is just a nice picture of a little blue butterfly called a spring azure that landed on my arm. Um, and I just find nature to be very soothing. It's very healing for me to be in nature and connect with other beings like this little butterfly. So there's a difference in naming and experiencing. And I mentioned Ossabaw Island before. the woman who was responsible for turning that into a heritage preserve was just, she's one of my heroes. Her name was Sandy West. And she has this quote about naming. And she says, "Do you care what they're called? I don't. They don't care what they're called. Why should I?" That's the kind of memory I have. The only person I've read about like this is Carl Jung. He said he couldn't remember anything from the outside, only from the inside. I can remember how I felt certain days, but I have no memory of dates, nor do I care about them. And I can relate to that. Can relate to enjoying something just for what it is, because I have a pretty bad memory about names of things. But I also really enjoyed learning how to name things so that I could tell people what I saw. Because if I say, "Oh, I saw this purple flower with, I don't know, six, maybe eight petals," I don't think that that would really get the message through to them what I saw. Um, but if I, just want to enjoy the experience, I can just enjoy the experience. So this flower in the middle was the flower on the first page of the presentation, and it was a flower that was blooming in Cusco, blooming in Sacsayhuaman on that walk when I fell, and I noticed it. And I noticed it reminded me of a flower I did know, a flower I love. It's one of the early spring flowers called the dwarf crested iris. And it took me a really long time. I still don't know like what the common name of it is. It might be Michi Michi, which means kitty kitty. Don't know why they would call it that. But I found the Latin name. And I asked my naturalist friend how to pronounce this in a text, and her response was, "Ha ha." So, um, I did figure out how to pronounce it, Hesperoziphion herreri. But if it is called Michi Michi iris, that's a lot easier to say. Um, So this flower was very important to me when I fell and broke my ankle. I was sort of on this grassy ledge and in an extreme amount of pain and fear, a lot of emotions. My trip was ruined. My ankle was really messed up, like huge already. I didn't know how I was going to get out of there. And there's this flower next to me. And I remember intentionally redirecting my attention to this flower whenever I would notice that my mind would start to wander to being afraid or the pain would get overwhelming. I would look back at the flower and notice its beauty, and it reminded me that there was more to what was happening in my life than me, even though what was happening was really painful and really scary, that there was still beauty in the world. And it helped to calm me down too. I had a friend with me, and she was helpful as well. Um, but the flower it was different, and it was my friend too. It was my friend as well during this experience. And I know in Buddhism there are a lot of references to nature and flowers. There's the flower sermon and the Lotus Sutra. So I just wanted to mention that. I'm not going to talk about that much more, but there's also the practice of meditation and cultivating concentration or samadhi or you know sort of one mind where the self and the other sort of become one, or you become one with whatever it is that you're doing. And that's sort of the foundation for uh, other practices, or other practices are a way to develop samadhi. I'm not really familiar with samatha. I've heard of it, or vipassana, which are, kind of two practices that are used in the Theravadan tradition. But, samatha is they concentrate on one object, meaning something outside of yourself, or with your breath. They could concentrate on your breath or an image or a sound. And it's, a technique for developing concentration. And then there's vipassana, which is the insight, um, which is more like a wider focus on your kind of changing thoughts, feelings, and sensations while you're meditating. Um, and then there's what we practice in Soto Zen, which is shikantaza, which is just sitting, which is really no technique. Which could be a technique too, depending on how you look at it. But we think not thinking, um, non-thinking, in Dogen's instructions for Zazen. So, sorry, that's my timer telling me I need to wrap it up, and I'm almost done. So, um, I've always loved this quote, like a lotus in muddy water, the mind is pure and goes beyond, thus we bow to Buddha. We say that at the end of the meal chant. And also like the idea of like water, like our mind as water. And when we meditate, our mind calms down, it settles like water. And when water settles, it becomes clear. So, I think in Shikantaza, we're kind of doing both the samatha and vipassana, or some combination of the two. Um, but we're also just sitting. So the last slide is see the forest for the trees. Um, Dogen says to study the way is to study the self. And, the three marks of existence are impermanent suffering and no self. And then, meditation, we can experience no self, or our little self, our egos, or our big self. Um, and we can also lose ourself, which is what I think happens in samadhi. Um, And I love that quote by John Muir, and into the forest I go to lose my mind and find my soul. Um, when we have meaningful experiences connecting with nature, it can encourage us to want to actually protect it. And there's a lot of that needs to happen now. There's a lot of damage being done to our environment now. Sandy West of Osaba, when her family first moved to the island, she did not want to be there. I think she was like 12. And she wandered out along this road and came across this tree. And she had this experience with this tree as another being with its arms up and wide. And everything changed for her in that moment. And she fell in love with that island. And that tree is still there, and it's called the spirit tree. So, um, what I would like to invite you all to do when you leave this talk is, if you to think of a favorite tree. Maybe it's a tree near your house or in your neighborhood, and go say hello to that tree. Introduce yourself and ask it a question. And if you can sit there for a while, do. If just stand or whatever, and just listen and see what the tree has to say to you. Um, and lastly, there's some resources, some articles, just a couple like national articles and local articles about forest bathing in Asheville. There's a lot more information out there. Um, I know a lot of you aren't in Asheville, but for those of you who are, the North Carolina Arboretum has forest bathing through Asheville Wellness Tours, and they also offer it. Conserving Carolina offers forest bathing. And Great Tree is having I'm going to be guiding a walk up at Great Tree in a few weeks. Quinn mentioned the date. I can't remember the exact date, but so if you would like to come and experience forest bathing in person at Great Tree, please join us. And that's it. Thank you.
Maybe we can open it up to any questions or discussion that people want to have.
Thank you for your talk, Brooke. Yeah, sharing this, your practice of this. And it reminds me, and as you went through it, uh, so much of a mindfulness meditation practice. It's aesthetically linked to the forest, but it's so much like that. I really appreciate your comments about it and how we can, and particularly a great tree, as it sits in nature. It's there. It's there for it. So thank you very much for that as an extension of our sitting practice. Yeah.
I've I've never ventured to Great Tree. Um, After all these years of joining you by Zoom, and so I'm going to look up about when you're having the forest bathing there. I think that would be a wonderful opportunity to come and experience the space that I felt connected to. Um, that sounds like an amazing adventure. So I'll seek that out.
Yeah, just so
Love to
everyone
see you
knows,
there.
it'll be on April 19th, Sunday, April 19th, from 2 to 5 p.m.
All right, I'll see what I can do. Thank
Mark your
you.
calendar.
Wanted to ask your experience bathing by yourself versus with others, and yeah, the difference.
So when I got a walk, it's with other people, or when I'm with other people, there's the opportunity to talk about the experience and share the experience with others and by myself. Um, I'm not connecting with another person per se, but I am still connecting with nature and the more than human world and connecting with myself too and my own experience. So being with other people just adds another dimension to it of connecting with other people. But it's all about connection.
I wanted to ask whether doing, um, being in nature now that you're purposely, like consciously doing forest bathing, has it changed? Has it changed your experience of being in the woods?
It has a little bit, but I kind of found that I was sort of naturally doing it myself before learning how to guide a walk. So that's why I just felt so drawn to it. And I grew up in nature. I feel very comfortable in nature since I was just a small kid. Um, so, but I think for other people who aren't, and that's what I wanted to do with this, is to help other people who might not be as comfortable in nature or might not really know, what to do or how to connect, to give them those tools for themselves.
Beautiful. Thank you.
I think it's interesting to thinking about like how long humans have been around and how new a lot of our environments are compared to nature that's been here for billions of years. Um, it's almost, and I also kind of grew up in nature and sort of naturally doing this practice, and it kind of makes me think like I want to almost like flip the script on a lot of the statistics I was hearing in the presentation, like. It's like, oh, maybe like living in a city causes depression, it's like, or like all these things that we might be scared of in the forest, like the spiders and the snakes and the poison ivy. It's like, there are sort of these things that I'm slightly scared of in the city, and sometimes I'm just so adapted to them that I don't really perceive it as like a threat as much as I just like slowly get more stressed throughout the day. But anyway, I think it's interesting thinking about what our sort of baseline is as a person and how we approach the whole practice of this. If it's a practice at all, or if it's just like how we are.
That reminds me of the comfort zone. Someone who grew up in New York City is very comfortable in that environment and may even have, like you said, a low level kind of depression or anxiety from being there that they're not even really aware of. But, um, if I went to New York City, I would be really stressed out and I would really miss like seeing like a green grass and trees. It would be out of my comfort zone to be there.
We have time for maybe another question if anyone has one. Okay, well everybody mark your calendars for April 19th. Genryu will be leading this at Great Tree from 2 to 5 p.m., so please be there so we can all experience this together. I'm going to make some announcements for the upcoming week or so, and then we'll get back on air. So there's an Intro to Zen class tomorrow, which is on Zoom only. So you can check the website for the Zoom link and everything. It'll be tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. if you're new to the practice. The speaker for next weekend is Paige Conco-Gilchrist, and that's her seasonal embodied practices, yoga, Dharma movement, Dharma flow. So at the turn of every season, so March 21st being the turn of the spring, she comes and does some seasonal movement to kind of invite in the energy of the spring. So that'll be next Saturday. I also wanted to let people know that the registration for the April session is open. That session will be from the 3rd through the 8th, and you could stay for 3 days or 5 days. But register for that soon if you can. There will also be a session in May 1st through 3rd. So get your registrations in when you can. I think that's all I had. Anyone else have anything? Fabulous. Okay, let's get back to merit. May the merit of this practice. May the merit of this practice. benefit all beings, and bring peace. Okay, thank you everybody.